Hello, this is Jamie Mitchell, and we are back from another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Pentagon News Blackout from morningbrew.com, posted by Be the Art One, and that's cross-post from the First Amendment subreddit. The government is shutting the door to the free access of the press. We are turning closer to a full-tarian government. Is this just going to stand in the way? And that's the article itself titled Media Rejects Pentagon Reporting Restrictions en masse. And yeah, personally, if the government doesn't want to provide access to any media outlets, that's on them. Ultimately, the government can set whatever rules it wants to, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. I personally think the government should try and be transparent as possible. But Reddit only cares because this is the out group being untransparent rather than the in group. I'm sure if it was the Biden administration saying, "Oh, you can't check into the Pentagon," Reddit would think it's completely reasonable. But since it's the Trump administration, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have Apple and Google say they'll reluctantly comply with new Texas law from Cron.com, posted by FlimsyAl5563. And the actual title of the article is Apple says new Texas law means age verification for web or sports apps. And yeah, personally, I don't think the government should be determining if apps should be forced to provide age verification or not, even in the case of pornography apps. Personally, I think age verification is a good idea. I don't think kids should be checking on pornography websites and all that. But even though they can just easily get around that by entering an earlier birth date in a lot of cases. But regardless, I don't think it's the government's job to enforce. I think it's very much the job of the parent or guardian to check on what their kids going on online. And that's my thoughts there. We don't need the government enforcing policies like age verification. That should be up to the companies and the people using the websites or apps. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have my understanding of geolibertarianism. Please give me your feedback. And that was a post from, I think, Agent of Dallas, but looks like they've since deleted their account. So I'll just read the PowerPoint they posted. They said, it says, recap, man's natural slate is to direct his life. To deny this is to engage in performative contradiction. Any party that attempts to direct man's life is acting morally. The law of society should reflect the moral principles derived from what we can observe. Example: individual, man collects currency after providing a service. And then the other example: some sexy guy steals man's property. What's the issue? Man owner himself uses himself to acquire property, lend currency. Some sexy guy attempting to take man's property non-consensually is the same as assuming ownership of the man and his property in extension. In other words, the sexy guy trying to direct man's property is the same as directing man. But to report that we do not own ourselves is to engage in performative contradiction. In conclusion, theft is immoral no matter how sexy you are. Example state, man collects currency after providing service. The state taxes man's property. What does the state do? The state using taxpayer money to spend on social services is the same as saying to the taxpayer, I own you, so I can get to tell you where your money should go. You cannot own other people, so we can state that the income tax is immoral. The using taxpayer money to fund a system that protects your natural rights doesn't count because it punishes aggression, but maybe there is a way to tax non-aggressively. Libertarian economics basis, man directs himself. A direction man can take his life is to use his property for various purposes. So if it is immoral to attempt to direct man to using property for purposes that he does not agree to pursue, so a legal code should emerge to outlaw individuals and including the state attempting to control others and their property and extension. How do you fund this legal code? Enter Henry George. What did Henry George believe? All taxes should be abolished because they're distortionary and they should be replaced by a land value tax. Alternatively, George believed that land should be socialized and ownership of the community occurs via LVT that sends people who live within after the state collects it. And then it says, basically, economically, morally, it makes sense. And then we'll just discuss morals for now. Man collects currency after providing a service. Landowner collects rent from man. What's wrong with this? Man needs land to live on and produce things. Man is essentially forced into the land market to obtain this essential good. Having to pay for it via rent is the landowner indirectly assuming ownership of man and his property to direct toward their own purposes. What's the remedy? The state sends the rent back to the individual in the form of a dividend. Man pays the landowner for rent for an unavoidable resource. The state confiscates rent from landowner. Explain the morals. The landowner attempts to direct man's property for their own purposes like they own man. The government confiscates the cent currency and gives it back to the man. The land value tax creates a process of restitution where the land user gets their property back. To conclude, state the nature of man. From there, you can obtain moral principles, create legal systems that uphold these moral principles, use income, corporate sales tax to fund it, use LVT to and they have no, because these taxes will violate man's nature, use LVT to fund it. This works because rent collection is a form of aggression, and LVT ensures that rent is returned. And then the OP had rent collection negative morally, and the basic income that sends it back is positive morally, so ethical equilibrium is restored by the land value tax. And yeah, personally, I think that is I think Georgism is probably I think the land value tax proposed by Georgism is probably the most ethical form of taxation. So I'd agree with that. But personally, I do think any taxation paid non-consensually is theft, and that includes the land value tax. I mean, if people want to pay a land value tax, I think that's fine. But I don't think people should be forced to do so if they don't want to. And that's very much, I think, the libertarian position. Ultimately, all taxation is theft. But you could argue that, like this guy's doing, like he says, if you own land, you're inherently taking it from anyone else's use. But, ultimately, anyone who owns land owns it through, hopefully legitimate means, maybe illegitimate means, but, they own it through, maybe contracts, maybe force, but they own it. And it's not the state's job to say who owns what land. And you could argue that, the state should intervene if maybe someone owns too much land. But regardless, it ultimately comes down to who has the force and resources to justify doing what they want to. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Usually that's the state has the force and resources to do whatever it wants. But maybe sometimes that would be private individuals. And I'd agree that if a private individual gets too much land or resources, that might be a problem, especially if they're very authoritarian over that land and resources. But ultimately, if you're not forced to interact with them, people are going to justify what they justify. If they do end up taking over your land and you want to protest against their authoritarian actions, I think that's fine. But if they're a private individual, they won't have the legal monopoly on the use of force, and I think that's important to remember as well. Next, we have opinion. Most Jewish Americans believe Trump is exploiting anti-Semitism, from the ChicagoTribune.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's crossed from the No Shit Sherlock subreddit, which looks like it's since been removed by moderator. That's glad it's Reddit for you. Classic censorship central at this point. They always love to censor. But regardless, personally, I think it's interesting how Reddit says, Trump doesn't really care about the Jews. But, you can find a lot of anti-Semitic comments on Reddit as well. I don't really care for the ADL. If they said Reddit's the most anti-Semitic website on the internet, and, it just goes to show you, when it's the out-group doing it, it's anti-Semitism, but when the in-group does it, it's anti-Zionism. And, it just goes to show you that these people have no principles other than in-group good, out-group bad. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have America First. No Billionaire Buddies First, from paulkrugman.substack.com, posted by Patan Furchi, and they added an excellent economic analysis of the situation in Argentina and best sense use of the power of the U.S. government to save his hedge funds buddies' bad bets. And yeah, personally, I don't think the U.S. government should be bailing out Argentina and Becen's buddies in the hedge fund industry. But, ultimately the U.S. government has the ability to spend its taxpayer money on whatever it feels like. And that's personally why I think the libertarian solution is you shouldn't be forced to pay taxation, especially when you can't earmark what the money is going to, like we have currently. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Democratic Socialist of America denounces conditional Israel-Gaza ceasefire deal, demands Palestinian liberation, from nypost.com, posted by Socialist or Morons, and they added goddamn morons. And yeah, personally, I think if Joe Biden or a Democratic president did this new Israel-Gaza ceasefire deal, Reddit and the DSA would be all over it and say it's the greatest thing ever. But since it's the bad orange man doing it, Reddit has to think it's the worst thing ever. I'm not gonna lie and say, there's nothing that can be desired. You could argue that there's some stuff to be desired by this new Gaza-Israel deal, but Reddit only cares that orange man bad and everything. Reddit has to be against anything orange man does, even if it's something that they would support if Biden or a Democratic president did it. And that just will show you they have no values other than orange man bad. I'm not gonna say that this ceasefire deal is perfect, but I definitely don't think the DSA and Reddit would be denouncing it if it was Biden being the one passing it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have ICE equals Gestapo. Yes, I know that it is hyperbolic. Posted by Soggy Habit 6717. And they added, we all know that the police are just the armed forces of the state, but this new wave of police violence towards citizens, no warrant arrest, home invasions, no due process, prolonged detainment without arrangement, plainclothes forced kidnapping, no regard for collateral damage, etc., really does seem to we now have a full Stasi-style police state in the U.S. How do we respond? And yeah, personally, I guess you could say the ICE or the Gestapo or the Stasi or whatever, but personally, all the state law enforcements has a monopoly on the use of force, and they pretty much can do whatever they want to. ICE is just currently the one that Reddit talks about. Reddit seems to think that ICE didn't exist before this year, when in reality they've been around since the George W. Bush's presidency, and it just goes to show you that Reddit only cares about whatever the current narrative is. ICE deported a lot of people last year as well, but Reddit didn't care because it was Sleepy Joe in office rather than Orange Dawn. And that just goes to show you they have no values other than in-group good, out-group bad. But regardless, all the things this guy mentioned, no warrant arrest, home invasions, no due process, prolonged detainment without arrangement, plainclothes, forced kidnapping, no regard for collateral damage, the state's always been doing ever since it started existing, not just the U.S. government state, but rather the state in general. But, Reddit only cares since the orange man's in power. I'm sure if this was ICE was going after, or ICE or another government agency was going after a group that Reddit didn't like, let's say they were disappearing MAGA voters off the streets, Reddit would think it's the greatest thing ever, but since ICE is in the out group, Reddit thinks it's the worst thing ever. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Also, I really like how Reddit constantly compares things to the Nazis, and when you say everyone who dissents at all is a Nazi, that's how you get stuff like Charlie Kirk getting murdered, and personally, I don't think that's very good, but ultimately, I just think it's kind of hypocritical that Reddit says, oh, we need to turn down the temperature, but they also consider anyone who dissents at all to be a Nazi, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Next, we have a glimpse into the future and control of information, posted by EasyZZ75, and that's a cross post from the Obscure Patent Danger subreddit, and that looks like some guy on TikTok, The Last Stand 01, talking about how, if you want it's some 3-minute clip about how, I guess, maybe they'll have more control over social media and information. Personally, I don't really care for that. But, I think they already do have a lot of control over the social media and narrative control, even if a lot of people do think otherwise. The state is pretty much the primary narrative creator these days, either directly or indirectly, and that's, they used to have their buddies in legacy media really be the ones hashing out the narratives, but now increasingly do have social media and the people increasingly creating their own narratives, but regardless, the narratives are usually based on whatever the state is currently doing, and that they still pretty much directly control the narrative in that regard. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Fucking Disgusting, posted by FlimsyOut5563, and that's cross-post from the March Against Nazis subreddit. And that looks like some screenshots from Now This Impact. Now this is another progressive news circle jerk like Vox or More Perfect Union and all that. And it says, popular We Rate Dogs account calls ICE fucking losers for shooting and killing family's dog. And then they have a few more slides as well, but I'll skip over those. And they added, I don't have much to do too because I'm baffled on how fucked this is. This regime is beyond levels of evil. And yeah, personally, I don't think the state should be killing people's pets, but ultimately the state has legal monopoly and supports to get usually whatever it wants to. The state could kill you if it felt like it, and oftentimes they might not even be held accountable since the state controls the courts and legal system as well. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have Not Kids, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and that's cross-post from the Political Wonderland subreddit, and that looks like a post from Blue Sky from this Empathy. Kids, according to Veep, they're not kids. Peter Giunta, 31, Joe Maligno, 35, Annie Cicati, 28, Alex Dwyer, 29, William Hendricks, 24, Luke Mosselman, 24, Samuel Douglas, 27, Rachel Hope, 27. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for, they were having a circle jerking about edgy jokes in a group chat, but, ultimately, people should be able to say whatever they want to, and if you want to come after them for it, that's fine. I think it's interesting how Reddit's all about, oh, these guys were circle jerking edgy jokes in a group chat. Well, meanwhile, Jay Jones, the Democratic nominee for Attorney General of Virginia, has some edgy checks as well, but has to sweep that under the rug because he has a D next to his name rather than an R next to his name. And yeah, personally, you can find a lot of edgy people on Reddit who are this age as well, and their comments are public and not in a private group chat. But Reddit would never hold them accountable for pretty much saying the exact same thing as these guys did. It just goes to show you a lot of people have no values, only who's ever in the in-group or ever in the out-group. If these were all Democrats in a Democrat group chat, Reddit would be sweeping it under the rug just like they did with Jay Jones. Next we have, with no takers yet, White House sets meeting of colleges still weighing an agreement with Trump, from APnews.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I think, the state shouldn't have any control over education, so I don't think colleges should have to deal with Trump if they don't want to. But, if Trump does want to force them into an agreement, the state has the legal monopoly on force to justify pretty much whatever it wants to, and that does include in regards to education. Next we have WAPO. ICE has been rapidly signing spyware contracts in recent weeks, including for its iris scanning software, drones to phone protests, and cell phone hacking technology. There's a $30 million contract for Palantir. They refuse to rule out using this tech on anti-fascist activities. From Twitter.com, posted by Legio.x, and that looks like a tweet from Emma Vigeland, who tweeted just that. And yeah, personally, I don't think ICE should be go spying on people and doing all that, but the government's always pretty much been spying on people. The NSA spying revelations that the NSA was spying on American citizens were all the way back in 2013 under the Obama administration, but Reddit these days, they could kind of sweep that under the rug and say, oh, this is a unique evil that ICE is starting. This is more part of the course of anything, but Reddit needs to market Trump as a unique evil, just like how they marketed W as a unique evil back during when he was president, and I'm sure they'll market the next Republican president as a unique evil as well, even though a lot of Republicans are just par for the course at this point. Same with the Democrats. They'll just spy on you and take away your rights and liberties, regardless of which letter of the Uniparty they serve. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Next we have, senators were forced to vote for war on Venezuela without approval from Congress, from NPR.org. And yeah, personally, I think that's a good idea. But ultimately, the government can justify going to war with whatever country it feels like. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that. But it's interesting. We're technically in a government shutdown. We still might be going to war. It just goes to show you that if the government ever does shut down, it really only just furls a few people. Or in the grand scheme of things, a lot of them may still be active because the government can deem whatever service it wants essential, even going to war with a country that doesn't have no business going to war with. And yeah, it just goes to show you the government can justify whatever it feels like, even if it's technically shut down, even though it's not really shut down. That's just the term they use. And I think I have another post I wanted to go over on the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. Well, I have two posts I want to go over on the Libertarian Party USA subreddit. Libertarian perspectives on not voting. I posted that one. I said, the off-year elections in my state are coming up in a few weeks, and normally there are no third-party or independent candidates on the ballot for those, so I usually just write fictional characters and refuse to vote for any major party candidate currently. Might make an exception if Thomas Massie ever gets the GOP nomination for POTUS. There's also a judicial retention election for the Free Democrat state Supreme Court justices, which I personally vote no for. You hardly get the opportunity to vote against the Democrats voting for the Republicans, vice versa. With that passes, they would arguably just replace Republicans who might be better on some issues worse than others. As for sales opposed to making about saying as year's elections out, I personally make the argument that not voting might deny to me the libertarian voting option possible, arguably more so than voting for the Libertarian Party candidate. By not voting, you're not forcing your students on anyone else. I think that's arguably the biggest part of libertarianism, that no one should be making decisions for anyone else if they don't feel like it. Sadly, in a current forced collectivist system of government, that is oftentimes not the case. False. And I'd agree with that, voting is just forced collectivism. I don't think people should be voting for other people's who should be lording over other people, even if they think it's justified in making their voice heard. You have plenty of other ways to make your voice heard, especially in the age of social media, and I think that's important to remember as well. And then we have another post I want to go over, the original No Kings protesters, and it was a post from the Help Leading Against Crosswords from the RPIC subreddit. It was a picture of the revolutionary people, and I said, Reddit seems to think the founding fathers are simultaneously fascist slave owners, but also the original No Kings protesters. It's just like how Reddit loves World War II era U.S. soldiers, but hates someone to become the typical suburban dads in the 1950s. And just going to show you, Reddit tries to in-group a lot of American history, but, they're ultimately going to be placed in the out-group when Reddit feels like it's narratively justified, and, that's very much how Reddit works. They try and out-group people as much as possible, except when they're needed to be put in the in-group, like the founding fathers are in this instance. So we're going to wrap it up there. Wait, I got another post. New evidence for abortion assistance allegations appears to upgrade, FCPS says, from FFXnow.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, personally, I don't think the government should be paying. That's Russ was from Virginia subreddit, by the way. And I personally don't think, the government should be paying for abortion if people doesn't want people to pay for it. But ultimately, the state can justify spending money on whatever resources it wants to, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. And if you think abortion's murder, I definitely don't think you should be forced to pay your taxpayer dollars to it. But ultimately, the government can justify sending money wherever it wants to, even if it's something that you think is murder. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're gonna wrap it there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.